Hello, everybody. Welcome to Reddit Roast number 14, I think we're up to. John, lovely to see you again. Great shirt choice again. Everybody watching, like, I promise we did not do this on purpose. John and I keep matching completely by accident. John, nice to see you again.
Pure coincidence, Sam. Happy Friday. Glad to be here.
Happy Friday. So this week we have an interesting batch of profiles to roast. It somehow become low GPA week. So again, not something we've done on purpose, but just so happens that a lot of the questions coming through on Reddit this week are low GPA candidates, several times because of health issues during undergrad, which is interesting. So that's a topic that we're going to touch on. We're also going to talk about, therefore, sort of how to strengthen your profile and sort of overcoming a blip like that. And John, I think we might have found the dumbest question ever asked on Reddit, which we will cover right at the end of today's session. So, should we dive into the first profile?
Let's do it.
All right, awesome. So we have a 28-year-old African American. Goal is to apply in round one, 2026. Also applying to other programs, etc. Recently, 28-year-old black male. Okay, GMAT 720 on the old GMAT, which is respectable. I think we agree. Undergrad, bachelor's in environmental science, 2.8 GPA, John, from a smaller public university in New Jersey. Worked two jobs to pay for school while treating autoimmune disorder. Okay, graduate studies, master's in sustainability management with a much higher GPA of 3.8 from a well-known school. Again, full-time student while working full-time. Work experience, 4 years of work experience. Started off in environmental consulting, recruited to work for an engineering firm, now landed in environmental health and safety for manufacturing. Position title is specialist. Responsibilities are that of a manager. Environmental reporting, sustainability metrics, zero waste initiatives, health and safety, etc. Currently making 97K comp. Okay, extracurriculars. Active participant in my historically black fraternity with many various volunteering events to give back to the community. Also own a boutique exotic reptile breeding business, John. Hope you're not scared of snakes. I cannot think of anything worse than breeding snakes, but it's just me. Why MBA? Accelerated path to senior sustainability roles in ESH strategy, corporate responsibility and operations leadership. Schools, I've actually already been accepted, interesting, into a lesser known MBA program in New Jersey. However, I noticed that the value comes from recruiting, from T15 programs. So basically targeting, sounds like T15, but is very aware of the low undergrad GPA. There's a connection to Columbia via some friends by the looks of it. Targeting maybe Yale, think about Yale, maybe think about Fuqua, NYU Stern. Okay. And no specific questions being asked, but really profile evaluation is what he wants here. John, why don't we start high level? How do you see this profile?
I like this profile overall. I'm not going to lie, that reptile business has intrigued me a little bit. But we'll
Okay.
go through that. Academically, look, everything in this profile is telling me to forgive that 2.8 GPA. Dealing with a valid illness, working two jobs to pay their way through college, and a 3.8 master's to make up for it. But a 2.8 is still a 2.8, Sam. And even if that optional essay works the hardest that it could ever do, no miracle can repent for a 2.8 GPA. And you'll note that many of the top schools, have published their full ranges. And so that let that be a guide. So
Yeah.
academics, I have concerns.
Offset,
Um,
offset maybe by 720 though, right?
yeah, I think that 720 definitely helps, as well as that 3.8 masters. So academic is concerned. Professional, I love the environmental angle. I like that there is, OP has some leadership component to what they do. But when it comes to vocational type roles, it obviously will be critical to bring out more analytical and strategy type work, which I don't really see articulated. And we can talk about that later, Sam. And we can also talk a little bit about that reptile breeding business as well. Um, Demographically, underrepresented for sure. Goals, I love the callback to the current work and staying in the sustainability sector. I think, it would behoove OP to look at a role that would benefit from an MBA program, making sure that, an MBA is what's needed, or at least could greatly benefit and lead to and drive success in that role. And, all things considered, that's a good school list. I think Yale will be a great fit for OP. But that GPA is going to be the biggest question, the biggest red mark in their profile.
Let's address that elephant in the room then, or the snake in the room. 2.8 GPA. I did a little bit of research before our session started, and to kind of give viewers some context about why John and I are so worried about this. As John mentioned, some programs publish the GMAT, the GPA range. Not many, actually. I was surprised. Back in the day, you used to see this quite a lot, but fewer now. But Booth, for example, so M7, right up there, Chicago Booth, do publish the GPA range. And as you can see, the lowest GPA of their entire class last year was a 2.36. Now, we're talking about a 2.8 for this profile, which is, captured sort of within that range. So what John and I are saying is it can be done, but you can guarantee that people at the bottom of this GPA range have got some exceptional stuff compensating for it. A strong GMAT, strong GPA, GRE, masters, as John said, can help, other qualifications, and just generally a strong profile aside from the GPA. So this gives you some ideas, some context. And I think the key thing here is that the average is a 3.6. So you can think if you've got at the top end, you've got a 4, and everybody above a 3.6, so 3.6 to 4 is offsetting everybody that is 3.2 to 3.6, then anything below 3.2 is very, very exceptional and very, very difficult. And so that's why we're so focused on this. So, John, with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about, well, just quickly, what that optional essay would look like. So OP has some very clear, excuses for want of a better word, why he got that GPA. Talk to us, tell us what an optional essay might look like to kind of mitigate that as much as can be done in an optional essay.
Yeah, great push, Sam. I think, look, starting any essay with addressing, dear admissions committee, my 2.8 undergraduate GPA is not reflective of my ability to handle the rigors of an MBA program. I would like to provide, a context for why my GPA is below expectations, and then that's when OP would talk about their medical issues, as well as not having the time to be able to devote to academic studies. And then, after explaining what has driven that low GPA, offer up evidences of how, they're able to succeed in an MBA program, right? I would like to provide evidence of having succeeded in my master's with a 3.8 GPA, and maybe point to specific classes within the master's where he got an A, preferably the ones that are quantitatively focused, and then also point to their 720 GMAT, right? And then if there are other ways to bring that out, whether it's analytical work at their work, at their job, well, that's everything's fair game there. And, if during the undergrad there was a trend line, whether senior year they had a higher GPA, and whether they had some relatively strong grades, that's also worthy to mention as well. So plenty to work with here, Sam, in terms of in this optional essay.
Nice. So I think boiling that down, here's what happened, here's what I learned, and here's evidence that I'm doing better now. Nice. Okay, cool. Let's talk about this previous admit. The comment in here, schools. I've been accepted into a lesser known MBA program in New Jersey. My thoughts, John, as I see this, is it's kind of encouraging because OP is getting admitted somewhere. So there's a bit of to me, that's saying, okay, good, you're onto something here. No mention of any scholarship there, though. That would have been even more encouraging. How do you think OP would want to be adapting this lesser known MBA application to an M7? Like, what is he going to take away from that he's going to use? What might need to change? Any thoughts?
I think you're looking at pretty much a similar process. I think the stakes are just much higher with an M7 program. And so devoting more time to the optional essay, making sure you have a stronger narrative, tightening up those goals. I think everything just dialed up a notch, Sam. I think that's how I would approach it. I think, OP has had experience applying to an MBA program. I think that confidence will help when it comes to everything from asking about recommendations and the interview process. But yes, I would imagine everything has to be dialed up.
Yeah, my thoughts on this are you could have got away with dropping the ball in that last application in a couple of areas. Like maybe your goals didn't have to be watertight, or one of your recommendations isn't that good, and you've still got the admit. If you're going to get into M7, you need to seal those gaps, and you need to make sure your entire app is bulletproof. I think that's sort of my main takeaway. Okay, John, let's get on to this reptile breeding business. So I guess this is OP has put this in the extracurriculars section, and it makes it sound like this is something he's doing more for fun than for funding to make money. How could he use this to his advantage? What are some of the traits that this conveys? How is an adcom going to see this extracurricular?
This is an unconventional one, and I have some thoughts, but I also want to, preface this with a example LinkedIn headline. Would you like to hear it?
Yes, go for it.
How taming iguanas and lizards taught me about cross-functional management. But in all seriousness, I think there's an opportunity for OP to connect this somehow to their sustainability and environmental angle. I don't think this should be, I'm rearing them for their skins so I can make leather and sell them to, the highest bidder. I think that's going to be tough to for anyone to swallow. But I think there's an opportunity to make this interesting. I think there has to be, how does this help make the world a better place angle to this reptile breeding? I don't know what exactly this would look like, but OP has an opportunity here. What are your thoughts, Sam?
Yeah, it might not be for the skins, to be fair. It might be for pets.
Yeah.
And there might be an argument that he's doing it in a more sustainable or eco-friendly or animal-friendly way than others. And there might even be a story there. Like, I discovered this world of immoral breeding of iguanas or whatever it may be, and I decided to do it in a more humane way. And I'm setting up this business, putting in place new processes, new standards to do that in a way that you can then feed into the whole environmental health and safety theme. I think that could be a positive in that way if handled well. Interesting. Okay. And so I guess the point here that I want to emphasize is that topics like this, which could be perceived by some people as immoral, or some people's values might go against some people's values. That doesn't mean you can't write about it. Just be sensitive to how some people are going to perceive these things, and make sure you kind of write about it in a mature way that comes across as conscious and aware of these sensitivities. Okay, good.
I think OP has the best of intentions when it comes to reptile breeding, so I'd be willing to give OP the benefit of the doubt. There is a spectrum, right? You have folks who work in maybe for cigarette companies. You have folks who work in alcohol, and if you work for like a Moet Hennessy, no one's telling you you're promoting alcoholism, right? It's a job's a job. And so I think I think it's all about perspective. It's all about context. And I think, especially with this environmental sustainability angle, I think OP can make something happen from this reptile business.
Yeah. Just building on that, one of the most successful, interesting, and liked characters of my MBA program works at one of the well-known tobacco firms. Did before the MBA and does now.
Yeah.
There is a pragmatism in the business school world that these things are sort of understood, and
Yeah.
not that necessarily there's a parallel between reptile breeding and cigarettes, but I think you get the point. Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. So I think hopefully what we've done there is given a cautiously optimistic and constructive perspective of this profile. I'd like to highlight some of the consultants gassing up this guy in the comments. I was blown away by this. Never seen somebody, John, with a 2.8 GPA getting as much positive feedback as this guy's getting in the comments. So I think the takeaway or my final message on this is like, OP, you've got work to do. You've got work to do. You have got a chance at these schools, but don't underestimate just how much work is involved in doing that. Okay, John, let's move on to the next profile. So we have another profile review. This one is we have entitled The Good Doctor. So it's UK surgeon, corporate health board member, trying for M7 and HSW. Okay, we have a Brit. Hello, Brit. Welcome, Brit. I'm applying to US-based MBAs. I'm a British Indian doctor. I am a doctor in general surgery. What are my chances? I want to apply for round 2, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, Columbia, Yale, Stern, Sloan. I have 2 years of experience in medicine. I serve on an elected board on a corporate elected role on a corporate board of a large London hospital. I have some experience in healthcare management. GPA, UK doesn't do GPA as we know, but I got a roughly 3.5 GPA. Now, reading between the lines, it looks like that's a 2-1 on the UK system, which is solid. Work experience. 2 years as a doctor, general surgery resident. Sit in a corporate board with a hospital of over $1 billion of revenue. It's not a paid role, but still, I would think you would agree, John, very value add. Sat on National Education Board for NHS junior doctors. Business experience. Founders associate at a health tech startup. That's interesting. Extracurriculars, more kind of healthcare charity work. Local charity to help underprivileged children into careers, hold a teaching role at a hospital to medical students, and goals, John. I want to go to a search fund focused on healthcare back in the UK or maybe stay in the US. Haven't done the GMAT or GRE yet, planning on taking the GRE. Okay, let's assume I get an average score. What would you see as my chances? John, roast this guy for us.
I think it deserves a strong dark roast, but I do like OP's profile. Start with that. Let's start with that with the academics. Again, not a formal GPA system, so that 3.5 is or 2.1, as you say, is directionally solid. Won't be factored into school reporting, so that GRE will have to work very hard, especially because not all undergrad med schools or equivalents have robust classes that automatically that school officials look for that are math related, for instance. So cautiously okay. Professional, I worked with a former NHS doctor before with a very similar profile, Sam. Got admitted to LBS. That big picture strategy work that OP is working on will be very important to call out, especially with all the other, in concert with all the other board leadership positions. I love the startup experience, even though it's only 3 months. Play it up somehow. Not easy to accept to assess oftentimes when it comes to medical work, but these are very respected degrees, and I can see a strong potential here. Demographics, okay. British Indian, I don't quite see as an overrepresented minority simply because, based in the UK, but I would love to hear your thoughts about that, Sam. And the goals are lovely. But a search fund for someone who is a doctor straight out of MBA program is an ambitious one. I think it's perfectly fine to mention as a long-term far out goal, but we can talk about this again, Sam. I think a short-term goal should be joining a health tech company in a product role or an LDP or something equivalent. I like this profile, lots of potential, just needs a little bit of change the perspective a little bit. I think Bob's their uncle.
Okay, so there's one thing that, from the academic standpoint, we're not seeing, which I think might also be a factor. As you say, UK schools don't have a 4.0 GPA system, therefore those scores don't get directly contributed to rankings, etc. However, one thing that's not been said here is we don't know the caliber of the school in question. And that is something that would also do a bit of lifting here. A 2-1 from a really sort of top tier UK school. I'm talking Oxbridge, Imperial, Durham, etc. That would carry weight. And we don't know at this stage what that school kind of caliber is. I'm talking like the equivalent of Ivy in the US, for example, right? Ivy League.
Mhm.
Um, but I think we have to be cautiously positive because OP's work experience reflects, really, really, it is really, really strong and really, really good. And I think has probably comes about from quite a strong school originally. Now, one thing that I'm curious about, John, is like I think this leadership responsibility, or put in other ways, these extracurriculars could be framed really well in a leadership theme. What
Mhm.
do I mean by that? Right. Work experience, sitting on a corporate board elected by public of a hospital with $1 billion revenue. Right. That is an elected position. And there are
Mhm.
very few things I've come across better for conveying leadership than stories about running for election.
Yeah.
Right. You've got to pick your platform. You've got to
Mhm.
speak to groups. You've got to convey authenticity. There's communication involved. That could be an incredibly strong leadership story, potentially. The
Mhm.
other
Yeah.
aspect, sort of similar, that builds into that is sitting on the National Education Board for NHS doctors. That, again, is something that's going to involve leadership at scale, right? There are thousands of NHS junior doctors. This is a really well recognized position. And particularly for those who are curious, the NHS junior doctors are in the news, or have been in the news for the last few years, because they're constantly lobbying for better pay, better conditions, and rightly so. And so there's a very strong leadership argument there as well, leadership story there as well. And again, then the extracurriculars, you've got this trustee of a local charity and holding a teaching role. I think OP's theme needs to be leadership, 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 and really lean into that as a story. And I think if that's done well, and the GRE comes in where I think we can talk about where that needs to be, but if
Yeah.
and the GRE comes in strong, I think OP's in a great spot to target M7. I really do. I like the background. I like the story. John, where does the
Yeah.
GRE need to be?
Sorry, could you repeat
Where
that?
does the GRE need to be competitive for these target schools? Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, Columbia, Yale, Stern, Sloan, M7, basically.
I would- Yeah, I would say something in the mid 320 at the mid 320s at the minimum, high 320s to be competitive for the M7s.
Fine.
Um, I think that's again, I think the GPA is fine. I think admissions officers would be very excited by the prospect of hiring of admitting a doctor with a storied background. And as you say, Sam, that board experience is very different from I was vice president of this at my school club, right?
Seriously.
This is meaty, juicy stuff. And yeah, I have a couple ideas of what else OP could do, but mid 320s to high 320s. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm aligned. I'm aligned. And maybe a little bit higher. I mean, I think OP, as far as is going to smash the verbal, absolutely smash the verbal.
Mhm.
Sure
Yeah.
of it. So the question then is like, it's really just a quant challenge, and maybe for
Mhm.
that reason, the bar is a little bit higher, and I'd like to see a 330 if possible, but
Yeah.
we're on roughly the same page. Okay, John, you alluded to it in your profile evaluation. I want to talk about goals. For me, this looks more like a long-term goal than a short-term goal. Do you agree?
I agree.
Okay. So I guess let me justify that, build on this. If you're an adcom and you're looking at this candidate and you're thinking, in 3 years' time, we need to place this candidate out into a job market, out into the world. If they're
Mhm.
unemployed, our stats get trashed. If they're
Right.
unhappy, we might get blowback from that unhappy applicant, etc. So they are laser focused on asking the question: can we get this candidate into the job market, preferably into his target job? And this, to me, starting a search fund focused on healthcare back in the UK, that is lofty. That is lofty goal. And I am immediately on the back foot and wondering, what if OP can't get there? What if OP can't launch this fund? Are they going to be disappointed? Are they going to be upset? And if yes, that's a risk. And I'd rather give the admit to someone who's got a more concrete, more achievable goal. So, John, what would a good short-term goal look like, assuming that this search fund gets pushed out a little bit further into the longer term? What would be a good short-term post-MBA goal for this applicant?
Either a product or an LDP role at a health tech company or med device company. I think OP's experience working with med devices, obviously, with, doctor, as well as maybe, other aspects of health tech, whether that's telehealth or whether that's finding ways to upend the medical system. This is what I've noticed during my time at the NHS. It's all chaotic. And there are a couple things that we can have done that we could do to help. I wish I were in that position to be able to contribute. These are 2 or 3 companies at the forefront of innovating in that space, and I want to join these companies.
I love
and
that.
then talk about explore the idea of doing a search fund. Don't get me wrong. I think OP will be very successful in their eventual long-term goal, but that's an ambitious sell for a short-term goal in any measure.
Yeah, let me build on that, right? I'm imagining a narrative for a career goals essay that looks something like this. Working as a doctor in the NHS, we constantly face this particular challenge. I don't know what that challenge is. I'm sure there's a few, right? And in my experience, either on a board or on this health tech startup or whatever, I've identified a way that we can tackle this challenge. Or I've identified a company that is building a product to tackle this challenge. After the MBA, I want to spend a few years at that company in a business development role, in a research role. I don't know exactly what that would be, but at that company where I'm learning about that problem in more depth, learning about the solutions to that problem. And then my long-term goal is to start a search fund, investing in or growing or whatever products that are tackling this problem.
Yep.
However, for that, I need an MBA. I've got a really strong, medical background. I understand the medical side and the engineering side of these products, but I do not know the commercial side. I need an MBA so that I can market size this opportunity, so that I can create a go-to-market plan for this product, so that I can understand the competitive landscape. And specifically, I need these classes on the MBA to do that. The rockstar go-to-market professor, the corporate strategy class, the M&A class, etc.
Sure.
And so what you've done there is you've gone everywhere from a background story through a mission, a short-term goal, a long-term goal, and why I need an MBA. And that in about 500 words is your career narrative. So
I love that.
Awesome. I think we've given this guy everything he needs for a really good sort of head start on the application. OP, really like your profile. Sounds like John does as well. Get in touch. Happy to help you build that out. Okay, John, should we move over to the next profile?
Sure.
Hi, let's do it. Profile 3. So, is an MBA worth it without a major career shift? Is an MBA worth it without a major career shift? 27-year-old female, 6 years work experience, strategy manager in the United Arab Emirates with a 680 GMAT. Okay. Hi, all. I'd like to appreciate your thoughts on whether an MBA would make sense for me. 27-year-old female based in the UAE, 680 GMAT, 6 years work experience, currently working as a strategy manager in a fast-growing retail startup, had a couple of promotions, was at Bain before, undergrad, economics from a tier 1 institute, context. I'm not looking to make a major shift in terms of geography, function, or industry. OP is happy where she is. I'm not aiming to go back and build a career in consulting either. Open to exploring GM roles in conglomerates. Mid-long-term goal is entrepreneurship. Current comp is already in line with most post-MBA industry and consulting benchmarks in the region. So why am I considering an MBA? Personal goal I've been considering for years. Like to gain long-term experience, long-term leverage from the MBA brand, valuable peer network, and a productive pause to skill and reflect. So I think you'd agree, John, all valid reasons for considering an MBA. but OP's on the fence here. The dilemma: most people doing MBAs are looking for a significant career jump. I'm not. Struggling to make sense of the opportunity cost and the sort of the ROI. And my manager and founder feel it isn't essential. To be fair, I think they would say that, but are still willing to support me with LORs. Please help. Okay, John, what are you seeing?
Well, despite the fact that, OP is not sure about an MBA, I think there are some, some worthy gems in their profile. So academically, look, a 680 is kind of tricky. It depends on the demographic. I'm seeing UAE, but I'm assuming OP is, having graduated from an Indian university, I would probably place them in an Indian demographic. If so, a 680 would be challenging. And would probably suggest a retake. Not sure about the GPA, so that's all we have on the academic front. Professional, love the progression of MBB and then progressing to an industry role. I'm seeing 2 promos in 16 months at a fast-growing startup. That is solid, and I love the leadership. I love their oversight. That's going to reflect on well for those who were former consultants. Demographically, again, probably Indian origin, living in UAE. That's a pretty common path I've found with a lot of folks who have broad international exposure. So either way would probably still be an overrepresented minority. So something to consider, especially as it relates to that 680. And then look, OP doesn't have tangible goals in place. I think the rationale for pursuing an MBA, broad upskilling, getting a better network is all valid. I just don't know what and how OP would build that narrative, right? They've already gone into the industry side. They've already had 2 promotions. An MBA would still be beneficial, but OP would have to find compelling reason for how an MBA would help their profile and help them get to whatever goals these are. So up in the air here. Again, I do like this profile. A couple of things that I give pause. Over to you, Sam.
Yeah, I'm going to be a bit cynical. Beige is the color that jumps to mind, like our shirts, John, as I think about this profile. I think that the GMAT, as you say, is so kind of it's just lackluster, isn't it? Especially if you compare it to the Bain people. 680 is just not going to cut it for top schools. And I think it's fair to assume that given the tone of the post, OP is only really considering an MBA if it's from a top program, and that GMAT is going to shoot you in the foot, I'm afraid. Though M7 average is about 730 on the old test, you're a solid 50 points below the average. So that's going to really not help, especially given the fact that we're assuming you're an Indian applicant, which there's a lot of that have very high standardized test scores. Yeah. The other thing that sort of feels beige to me is, again, like you, I agree with you that these are valid from a personal perspective. These are valid goals. These are reasons most people, frankly, go and do an MBA is these goals. But the schools don't want to hear this. The schools don't want to hear that I want to get a strong MBA brand to leverage out in the future. The schools don't want to know that it's a personal goal that you need to massage your ego. They don't want that either. We need a clear and concrete goal and a passion. So I want to go into this after the MBA because I'm genuinely passionate about it. Let me tell you a story about what happened and where that comes from. I'm not seeing any of that here. Any of that. And maybe that's just because of the post OP hasn't included it. But my suspicion is if OP's not sure about an MBA, it's probably a signal that OP doesn't have that thing that they're driving towards and that they're passionate about. So again, that fills me with beige caution. The other thing that I want to talk to you about, John, is this kind of slight cynicism over comp. So my current compensation is already in line with post-MBA industry benchmarks in the region. So basically, OP seems to be a bit cynical about whether an MBA is going to result in a higher salary. We could talk about this all day, John, but what's your sort of high-level perspective on that?
Oh. I think most sponsored consultants, or depending if OP is sponsored, who go on to get consulting roles I mean, it's the the payoff is typically not immediate. I think it's more longer term. So I can see why this MBA might not seem might not pay off in the near term, but I think, you know, this is a cue for them to take a look at, you know, how the benefits net out in the long term.
Hmm. Interesting. I'm thinking from the tone of the comment down here, manager and founder feel it isn't essential, but they're willing to support me with recommendations. I think we can assume that OP is not sponsored. And I think that's
Okay.
probably why this whole discussion over return on investment and is it worth it for me, given that I'm
Mm-hmm.
paying it out of my own pocket. I think that's the tone of this. And I think then, if I was OP, I would think about it from this perspective.
Mm-hmm.
One, can I identify a goal that genuinely makes me happy, that I could write 500 words about and sound passionate about? If yes, good start. If no, I'm worried. Two, do I have the capacity right now to increase my GMAT score? Because you're going to need to, OP, especially if you're looking for sponsorship. And I think that if you can come up with a good narrative, get your GMAT higher, and sort of get yourself excited about this, you might be in a position where you can get scholarship money. And if you can get scholarship money, then the ROI starts to look a lot more interesting. And I think that swings it for you.
Yep.
That's sort of the sequence of events in my mind, John. Anything to add?
Yeah. That GPA is that GMAT is going to be really, really important. And I do agree with you, Sam. You know, whether that goal was manufactured or something super genuine, it has to come across as authentic in the eyes of AdCom, because AdCom is going to be evaluating your essay on two things. Is it credible or achievable? And does it reflect what you actually genuinely want to do? Right? And so if that passion is not reflected in the essay, then the application is going to fall apart.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so I think we're agreed. Cautiously, like, it's the door's open for you, but it's up to you whether you want to go through, whether you want to walk through it. I think that's the conclusion here. Okay, great. Next profile. So, chances of top business school. Hi everyone. Wanting to get people's take on my chances at T10 or T20 with the following stats. Went to a top 30 university in the US in the Northeast with a bachelor's in political science. Was involved in a few clubs, had a couple of leadership positions during undergrad. 2.6 GPA, John. Low because I was dealing with an autoimmune disorder. Okay. I plan on addressing it in the optional essay. Good. I'm also still very close with professors who would write a glowing recommendation that would back up that story. 685 GMAT focus, about 7, I think I would say it's 730 or so on the old GMAT. Extracurriculars, active in my company's BIPOC ERG, volunteer as an interviewer in my undergrad, marketing consultant for an old professor who's building his professional brand on social media, working towards a yoga certification. First gen, low income, 26-year-old black woman. Okay, 4 years of experience in tech sales. This is where we get into the work stuff. 4 years of experience in tech sales, events marketing, currently digital marketing in the cybersecurity industry at a leading cybersecurity organization. Hoping to pivot perhaps into product marketing in the food space, sparked by a recent research internship at my university school of nutrition and my autoimmune diagnosis, which has taught me about food science. Aiming for 426, wants time to craft a coherent story, maybe take some courses to strengthen weak areas of the application. Good. Questions then specifically. What are my chances of getting into a T20 or T10? Are there any other ways to offset my low GPA? And are there any ideas on side projects or fellowships I can work on to expose myself to the food industry to show that I'm being proactive? I like these questions, John. Okay, profile evaluation. How are you seeing this profile?
Oof. Well, we're going to address the big elephant in the room first, Sam, which is that 2.6 GPA. That's a tough pill to swallow. I think even with a professor recommendation, a school would have to take that into their averages. And we talked prior about, M7 schools that have made exceptions. But, that begs a larger question about that recommendation. And this is kind of a side tangent, but typically a recommendation you submit to business school shouldn't come from a professor unless you are applying for a different MBA program, you're still in school, or
Mhm.
if you're working with the professor currently on a very meaty postgraduate project, and maybe that plus the social media work could feed into that. I don't know if it's the same professor though. So yes, I think a T20 would be able to bite with potentially a good optional essay, MBA math, HBS core. Although I do think community college courses are better because they're a little bit more rigorously evaluated and for grades wise. So that's my concern with academic. Some reprieve there. Professional, I love the mix of functions and industries that are adjacent to each other. Digital marketing is always appreciated. OP should be sure to dial up the rigor of what she's done with digital marketing, even spin a little bit of AI in there, which is very, very welcome in the admissions office. Demographic, that's obviously a URM, Black, low income, first generation. I love the goals. Really nice tie into the personal story. Clear evidence of having done something about it, and the prior experience in marketing is going to help the narrative. I like everything about this profile except for the academic, Sam. I think OP is thinking about it in the right way in terms of convincing the admissions office that she is prepared for an MBA program, but I don't know if a 2.6 is going to tank this profile.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, lots to get our teeth into on this one. I feel like okay. Let's focus on those what you can do to offset the GPA. In this case, OP is talking about a microeconomics and statistic course at a local community college. Okay, so that's the community college route that you just touched on. Other options, mbamath.com. We know it's sort of a benchmark, so to speak, for teaching the stats and quant side of an MBA, kind of get you up to the level that you need to be to benefit from those kinds of classes during the MBA. That's a good one. HBS Core is like a micro MBA taught online. You get a certificate for. It's well recognized. That's the other benchmark, more from a sort of wider business school strategy stuff than the statistics side, but also valid. But John, you're saying you prefer the community college route because it's going to give you an actual grade which you can show,
Right.
but it's going to take a bit more time, no?
Yeah, it would. Look, I mean, I think with a 2.6, I think all hands on deck is needed. And,
Right.
I have spoken to a couple of admissions officers before who recognize the utility. They recognize MBA math, but I heard from one Kellogg rep that, you can take the modules infinite number of times to get your desired grade in MBA math. And so is it truly evaluative of your understanding of the topic, or is it more so you persisted and you were able to get that A, right? And so, maybe not a community college, but there are other asynchronous programs online, like Berkeley and UCLA extension schools have quant readiness courses in any number of topics that OP should consider taking because those are more rigorously graded and well respected among the community. So in conclusion, if you have no time at all, MBA math will still help you. But if you have the time, devote your time to those classes.
Great answer. Okay, let's talk about goals. I'm also quite positive about these. So
Yeah.
to recap, developed an interest in nutrition because of an autoimmune disease and is now thinking about a pivot to product marketing in the food tech space. I can already see this shaping up, John.
Oh, this is good.
I can already, my mouth's watering. I'm imagining starting with a story of the diagnosis. Maybe it's that one line, like autoimmune disease, positive. My heart stopped. I started sweating. My mum nearly fainted. Grabbed the reader's attention. From that moment on, my life, my career has been defined by this autoimmune diagnosis, this autoimmune issue that I've had. Here are some of the things I've had to do to change my life. My goal now is to help other people who are suffering from the same condition or other food related conditions by pivoting into the food tech space.
Yeah.
I want to use my existing skill set in marketing. I've been dedicated this so far to the cybersecurity industry, but I want to take that marketing skill set and apply it to this space that I really, really care about. Specifically, here are one or two jobs that I'm really, really focused on after the MBA. Maybe a couple of companies in the food tech space that are crushing it. Maybe a couple of companies that have relevance somehow to your autoimmune disorder. I don't know anything about it, but maybe it's like, I can't eat gluten. So there's a couple of food tech companies that are removing gluten from various foods. And I want to go in as a product marketing manager at this level at this location and really be laser focused on a particular goal. And then my longer term goal could be something a bit more lofty, maybe investing in startups in that space as an angel investor, for example. Super nice playing into that theme. However, for that, I need an MBA. I've already got the marketing background, but I've never had any formal leadership training. I don't know anything about accounting, so I need the accounting classes. Corporate valuation, so that I can, as an investor, I can pick out the investments I want to make. And there's your 500-word career goals essay. I love it. I love it.
We've written the essay for OP, Sam. We really have.
We have. How's that for value add? Okay, good. The one other point that I want to highlight is that as a very underrepresented group, first gen, low income, Black woman, I think you would do well to apply via the consortium, or at least consider applying via the consortium. Several of our clients last year applied via the consortium and had some very, very strong results out of it, including one of them who got the most scholarship money we've ever received in history. Incredible numbers. I would suggest considering going via the consortium. It'll mean you get to apply to a lot more schools with a bit less effort. But broadly, what it'll do is it'll really highlight this underrepresented background that you've got. So that's something that's worth considering. John, have I forgotten anything?
One thing about, I think, talking about ethnicity here, I think, one extra add to that narrative is, this is what I've experienced. It kind of sucked for me, but hey, I've noticed that this disproportionately affects, certain ethnicities. Let's take East Asian for instance. A lot of East Asians are lactose intolerant, right? And so that's an example of linking your problem to a larger populace, and finding ways and showing the admissions community that whatever you're solving is worth it for a large community.
I love it. And it just draws attention to this underrepresented aspect, which is a key strength in this profile. Good. Love it. Okay, next profile. Am I too all over the place for an MBA? Mal has tagged this in our prep as chaotic foodie. Hopefully you'll see why. Hey folks, Indian male, 23 years old, been lurking here for a while. Finally thought I'd throw my hat in the ring. Hello, sir. I'm trying to piece together my goals, my background, but it's all a bit chaotic. Quick version. Math major, somehow ended up in biotech, jumped to social impact, now obsessed with food. Worked at a research firm doing data-heavy cross-functional operations and recruitment work. Pivoted to impact-led projects, managed budgets and built teams. The name is a good Indian brand name, but might not be known geographically, internationally. Okay. Now dabbling in the food space, trying to understand what it takes to build a brand that sticks, even scribbling out plans for my own cafe, etc. John, I'm reading between the lines here. OP might be unemployed right now. Big, slightly messy post-MBA goals. Start something of my own in the education and food space. Entrepreneurship goal for someone who's unemployed. It's getting scary here. Maybe even try my hand at politics someday, because why not? Okay, fair enough. Questions. Am I trying to do too much? Is it too chaotic for a strong MBA narrative? Which schools would appreciate this kind of narrative? What kind of GMAT score do I need? Do I even have a shot at GMAT waivers? Aiming to apply SEP 27, which makes sense given OP is only 23 years old, and any advice for how to frame my story so it doesn't sound like a fever dream. Okay, John, let's try and extract from all this chaos, a bit of a profile evaluation, please.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, and I'm saying this from like a polite British / Midwestern way. We'll dive
Okay.
into the academics first. Look at the GPA is okay. The GRE is going to have to work very hard for these schools that OP is interested in. I'm thinking high 320s for his cohort, ideally a 330 plus, but take anything. Um, Professional, look, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. It's kind of like, you buy like a bag of, nut mix and there's like chocolate buttons in there. I never like those. So I do
And the
appreciate
potato.
yeah.
Such a mix.
Um, I I I do appreciate the mix of program management and that quantity post undergrad role, but OP is 23 years old. I don't think OP has spent that much time in each of these spheres, so I don't know how OP would be branded or positioned among admissions committee. I do think that OP is without a job currently. And that thing, about working with founders closely with founders at a food company is a little misleading. It's kind of like saying I plan to apply to Stanford GSB. I don't know whether you have that yet or not. But if you do, I think that would make the goal a lot it would be a much stronger narrative to feed. I think food CPG will make sense. Entrepreneurship is a risky goal, especially if, given how young OP is and the fact that OP is likely unemployed. So yeah, that's my concern overall with this profile. I think it's the lack of focus in their professional experience, as you alluded to, Sam, as well as those goals. I think we can find a way to weave something. I don't even know if we can, but we can try that. But over to you, Sam, first.
Hi. Okay. Yeah, let's just address those goals. So recapping or reminding everybody why these goals matter so much. For somebody who has a chaotic background, what we're going to try and do with your application is draw commonalities between all of these completely different things. For example, biotech, right? Biotech's involved, for example, in engineering healthy foods, for example, right? Then jump to social impact. Maybe the social impact is around health and healthy eating. Now obsessed with food. So again, there could be a healthy eating theme coming up in here. So, and yeah, now dabbling in the food space, looking to build a brand, seeing what it takes to build a brand that sticks, and building out plans for my own cafe. So what we're going to do is have to massage quite heavily all of these things you've done into a straight line, right?
Mhm.
Somehow there's like a food nutrition aspect to each of these things you've done. And we can frame it as I know about nutrition from loads of different perspectives. I know about it from a tech perspective. I know about it from a social impact perspective. I know about it from a commercial perspective. And that's why I'm best positioned for the following goal. Now, a goal that is entrepreneurship is immediately going to set off alarm bells, as John has said. Why? Because they just have no guarantee you're going to do well in entrepreneurship. You have no experience in entrepreneurship already. You have no investors. You don't even have a business idea. You're wondering about whether to make a cafe or a CPG product. Like you have no idea. So that goal is so risky that the schools just can be careful. It might work for a longer term goal, but I think in the short term, you need to insert something that is a bit more concrete in as a short term goal. John, what could be a solid short term goal for somebody with an interest in food?
Um, Maybe a hub of the wheel role in a relatively well-known large food company. So it can be brand manager or product marketing manager. I'm seeing that, and having been in the space myself, I think there is lots to be gleaned from a role that ties all these disparate things together
Yeah.
from the profile. So I
And
think that
FMCG
worthy
is the obvious sector, right?
correct. Yes.
Yeah, okay. They also, and we're going to come to this next, but they're also quite good rotation programs in the FMCG sector, right?
Sure.
Unilever have got one. There's a whole bunch of them that you could make the case that I've been moving around all these different areas of the food industry and sort of
Hmm.
rotated around all of these different industries because I'm really curious, I'm really open-minded, I want to learn about this whole industry. And I want to keep doing that on the rotation program at Unilever, for example, and kind of build up a more diverse profile because I realized that for my long-term goals of entrepreneurship, I'm going to need to understand all the different areas of this industry. That's starting to make sense from an AdCom's perspective, I think. Okay.
I think one thing that would help it is also just getting to the bottom. Well, finding the source of that passion is going to be really important. Um, whether that's like, why is food so important to OP? Is there something that they experienced, in their personal life?
Like the last
Uh,
person had the autoimmune disease
correct,
and that
correct,
triggered
correct,
their
correct,
interest in food. We need
correct,
your version of that.
correct, exactly. I think that's going to be a really important one to start with and preface with, and that can help tie, some of these threads together.
Yeah, I really, really like it. Okay, so let's go through these questions quickly, methodically. Trying to do too much. Is this too chaotic? Short answer, yes. Find a common thread. Two, which schools would actually appreciate this kind of narrative? Okay, I would say go and do a bit of research into schools that place people into rotation programs at FMCG companies. That's going to be how you decide schools. The ones that jump to mind for me, I'm not saying you necessarily can apply to Kellogg because you haven't got a GRE, GMAT score yet. We don't. There's lots of open and question marks. But for people who have got more visibility, that Kellogg stands out. I've seen clients get into rotation programs in FMCG after Kellogg. John, you were in the food industry, or have been in the food industry at points in your career. Are there any other schools that you found were overrepresented in the food industry in FMCG?
I would say some of the Midwest schools. I would point to schools like Kellogg. I would also look at Michigan Ross. And other than those two, I think I would also look at UCLA Anderson, which is a great feeder into many top tier CPG companies, as well as potentially a Duke as well.
Good.
I've
Okay.
seen successes and great feeders. Look, I mean, the reality is that Kellogg is moving more towards the consulting sphere, but CPG brand management is still, it remains a stronghold for that
Right.
program. So definitely consider.
So what GMAT score does he need?
Oh, you're just cutting right through it, Sam.
Yep.
I would want to see at least 685, 695 minimum for that cohort, and to make up for that 8.3-ish CGPA. It's not the best.
Yep. Okay. Um, do I have a shot at GMAT waivers? I'll take this one. Forget about GMAT waivers, OP. You've got enough to worry about here without having to write and worry about GMAT waivers as well. Get your good GMAT score. Use it to demonstrate your ability to stick at something, right? Because right now that's a question mark, and forget about GMAT waivers. If I'm applying SEP 27, what kind of roles can I aim for in the next year? So this is kind of where I got that unemployment guess from. I would say anything that leads towards that FMCG leadership development program would be beneficial. Anything that gives you exposure to a large FMCG company would be beneficial from a networking perspective, from an understanding how those companies function perspective. Any other kind of short-term pre-MBA roles you think, John, that jump to mind? Set somebody up for a product marketing manager role?
Any kind of um, I think that it's a mix. I mean, it's a mixed bag of things. I'm looking at anything ranging from, pure play marketing roles to perhaps, an operations role of some kind. I think the beauty of going into a function like brand management is that you can go at it from uh different career spheres. But I think having some kind of a marketing or operations role would set OP up for the most success at a CPG
Nice.
brand management. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I'm aligned. Okay, and then finally, the advice for how to frame the story. I think I said this before. Try and find that commonality between these areas, and perhaps from a nutrition perspective, use a story to explain where that passion has come from, and then set up a short-term goal that is directly linked to that passion and that theme, and then you're onto something. Okay, good. John, we've done all our roasting of profiles. Now I want to pick up on a couple of questions that have been thrown into Reddit to the hive mind, and I want to get your perspective on. The first one is leadership development programs. We've talked a bit about leadership development programs today. OP in this case is an incoming M7 domestic student and is deciding between an MBB or deciding between MBBs and LDPs. In other words, during the MBA, you're going to have to very quickly start recruiting for your post MBA roles and specifically your internships. MBBs, the consulting, and leadership development programs, rotation programs, you're going to have to make that decision quite early, and OP is not sure which one to focus on. As someone who values work-life balance and doesn't have huge loans, I'm leaning towards LDPs, but want to learn more about them. Do any current students or anybody who decided for or against an LDP want to share an update? Interested in hearing about what type of LDP, the salary, the hours, the cohort, what roles you exited into, and how your career trajectory compares in the short and long term to those who opted for consulting. Okay, John, what's your perspective of LDPs?
I like LDPs. First of all, they are MBA friendly. And I almost see LDPs as kind of an extension of your MBA because you get to experience different functions and you help to operationalize and put into action many of the principles and theories that you've learned from your MBA. In some cases, what's attractive about LDPs is that it gives you an additional couple years to test out the things that you are passionate about and or things that you're good at. And in most cases, it's structured. People give you a pretty long leash, and the work-life balance is indeed fairly favorable, with the exception, of course, there are a couple pharma companies out there that have a little bit of a tougher, they sort of work their LDPs a little bit harder, and that is apparent not just across the LDPs but also the entire company. But for the most part, I think LDPs are great.
Yeah, let's touch on this work-life balance aspect. I think there are some LDPs where you could, if you don't want to put too many hours in, where you could do that. But I do think that that's a personal choice. And I think if you could equally go into an LDP, really put in the hard work and rise. So an LDP is not necessarily less work than an MBB, I would argue. You've mentioned the pharma companies. The other one that really jumps to mind is Amazon have several LDP programs, for example, some for military vets, etc. And Amazon are well known for absolutely beasting people, right? If you think you're going to go to Amazon to not work very hard, go jump in the lake, right? It's not going to happen. So that I'm a little bit cautious of that angle, but I think it's fair to say that broadly and generalizing, you're going to have more travels and harder hours at MBB. So that's fair. What I think they do have in common, John, is this sort of rotation aspect to them. But the rotation, I think, happens at a different level. So at an MBB, you are a generalist, typically post MBA. And so your clients are going to be across a bunch of different industries. It could be banking one month, it could be government another month, it could be an FMCG company another month. So you're going to get exposure to a lot of different industries. And that's cool. But on an LDP, you're going to have to narrow down to one industry whether it's logistics with Amazon, whether it's pharmaceutical with Novo Nordisk. But you're going to have to focus on your industry. But then within that industry, you're going to rotate. In other words, an LDP will give you lots of exposure within an industry. An MBB will give you lots of exposure within lots of industries. And that comes down to personal choice. To what level are you ready to narrow yourself down? I think then that one other thing, just to be really pragmatic on this, and John, you'll hopefully maybe have some input on this, is we know that the MBB, McKinsey, Bain, BCGs of the world are in a challenging recruiting spot right now. We know that, and there's heaps of stuff on this online. In fact, there's probably some in Reddit in our MBA about how they are cutting back their post-MBA recruitment. So from a practical perspective, I would also say that MBB might be a challenging environment right now. Fair enough, that might change in the next year or two, but right now, bear that in mind. And therefore, from that perspective, LDP in an industry that's currently doing quite well might end up being might yield more positive outcomes. Is that fair?
That's very fair. No, I'm hearing the same thing in the industry, Sam. It's a tough time right now, and LDPs could be a great alternative, provided the folks are relatively interested to be able to lock in on the industry for at least a couple of years.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Let's move on to the next question. Now, this one, John, is not such a clever question as the last one we just saw. Question is, I know people say undergrad GPA doesn't really matter that much for MBA admissions if it's low, but can undergrad GPA help if it's high? John, OP clearly hasn't been watching Reddit roasts. Can you settle this once and for all, please?
Well, Sam, is sunlight good for plants? I mean, I think this is, yes, of course. I think when your schools evaluate you on, let me be diplomatic here. This is a roast, but I'm feeling like a barista today. So look, schools will assess your academic profile. Your academic profile consists of two things: your GPA as well as a test score, whether it's a GRE or a GMAT. If you have a low GMAT, you would want to have a high GPA to offset this low score. End of answer.
Okay, excellent. I think that's fairly clear. So schools care about rankings. Rankings consider the GPA. Therefore, schools care about the GPA. That's basically what it comes down to. How much? M7 average is about 3.6, although I'm seeing this year, I think Stanford was higher, more like 3.7, 3.75. So not only do they care, but they care about it's clearly aggressive how much they're going after people with high GPAs to get an average of 3.74. You think about how all of the 4.0 people are offsetting people with like a 3.5, 3.4, 3.5, 3.4 is not that low. And yet they're the lower end of the range that have been offset by the top cohort. So anyway, all that to say that, yes, it really does matter. And I think that really OP is thinking about this the wrong way. So OP is asking, can my GPA help overcome a low test score on the GRE? Obviously, the GPA is already in the bag and the GRE is not. So if you're having trouble with standardized tests like OP is, and you're targeting M7, I would encourage you not to think about it in terms of your GPA offsetting it. Go and get a tutor, knuckle down, work hard, get that GRE up into the ballpark that it needs to be for the M7s, which is like high 320s. And then you've got high GPA and a high GRE, and then you can target M7. All right, John, I think we've made the point here.
Very much so.
Good. And it looks like all of the, more or less, the consultants and the comments are agreeing. This comment is nonsensical, one of them says. I'm glad I'm not the only one to be rude. Okay, good. John, lovely to see you again. Looking forward to roasting a bunch more applicants next week. If you enjoyed today's roast, if you would like to hear how your profile is stacks up against other applicants, feel free to send it over to us. You can send it to us on YouTube. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. We will endeavor to roast your profile on Reddit. If you're looking at admissions consultants right now, we are currently 16th of May 2025. Now is the time to hire an admissions consultant for round 1 applications. John and I are both taking on clients right now, so get in touch and we'll be happy to help. John, lovely to see you again. Have a great week, and I'll see you Friday.
You as well. Bye, Sam.
See ya.